This is the story of the beginnings of Connecticut, New Hampshire, and Maine. No one is ever all good or all bad. The witch trials may have been a low point for the Puritans, but mostly these were good, strong, intelligent people. If they hadn't been, they never would have crossed the ocean. They would have stayed in England, as most English people did, even when they didn't like the way they were ruled. Because the Puritans were independent thinkers, they sometimes disagreed with each other. When they did, there was plenty of room in America. They could just start a new settlement. Thomas Hooker was minister in a little town near Boston when in 1636 he decided to move west. 100 of his followers went with him. He went to the beautiful valley of the Connecticut River. Today, no one is quite sure if he moved because of religious disagreements or because the valley was fertile and farming was easier than in rocky Massachusetts. Perhaps it doesn't matter. He found good farmland and he was free to preach as he wished. Hooker had no charter when he arrived in Connecticut. The king hadn't given him permission to be there. He moved in anyway. He had no legal right to the land in the eyes of the English, and certainly none in the eyes of the Native Americans. So the Connecticut settlers sent their governor, John Winthrop II, to England to get a charter. When he went to see King Charles II, Winthrop wore a handsome ring that had belonged to Anne of Denmark, who happened to be Charles's grandmother. Winthrop gave the ring to Charles. The king, naturally, was delighted to have his grandmother's ring. Connecticut got a charter. The land it granted stretched as far west as the Pacific Ocean, although no one knew how far that actually was. Soon, Puritans were heading straight for Connecticut. Massachusetts was getting crowded, and the land in Connecticut was inviting. A group settled at New Haven in 1638 and another at New London in 1646. Each town had its own minister. In 1639, the settlers in the Connecticut River Colony had an open meeting in which they drafted a groundbreaking document known as the Fundamental Orders. It was a constitution establishing a democratic state controlled by substantial citizens. This was the first written colonial constitution. While all this was going on, some people were moving north. The king had given a big piece of northern land to two friends, John Mason and Ferdinando Gorges. They divided that land, Gorges taking what became Maine and Mason taking New Hampshire. Mason and Gorges advertised for settlers in England, and people came. At first, New Hampshire was part of Massachusetts, with John Mason as its proprietor. A proprietor is the owner of land. Then it became a separate colony. Finally, the king took it back and held it himself as a royal colony. Maine was never a separate colony. It was part of Massachusetts until 1820, when it became the 23rd state. As soon as colonies were established, they began competing for good land and good people. The more people who came, the more land they needed. The big losers in this contest were the Indians. Serious colonization could not take place until the Indians had been pushed off the land. And pushed off they would be.